I have terrible news for you. Next Sunday is daylight savings. No, don't say woohoo, because that's the one you spring forward. Yeah, but sleep. So I feel like today's message on desperate measures is very important, because you're going to be very tired and have an opportunity to make very poor decisions. So, just so you know. Glad you are all here today. The rain did not scare you away, which is awesome. It actually looked a little bit like snow last night. It wasn't, but it looked like it in my mind, because hopeful thinking. But today is kind of neat. One of the first times that we are beginning to video record as we prepare to do live streaming to have an online campus. So today we're starting that. So that way if you miss service, or you can share it online, because we have an incredible opportunity now with the technology with us that we can now not only reach 200 people during 3 hours on a Sunday, we can now reach thousands of people every hour of the week. And so what an incredible opportunity to share what God is doing here at The Well with people all over the country and all over the world. So you're going to hear me say and address our online campus, our online community. It's going to sound weird for a little bit, but it's okay. Get used to it, because growing people change, right? There we go. So with that, I do want to welcome all who are listening online via podcast, or are listening or watching on YouTube or Vimeo. I don't know. If you're watching on Venmo, you're at the wrong website. But we're glad that you're here. You can always join us at gotothewell.church for all the information. One of the great things about experiencing a message, whether it be online or here, what's so important is that we get to be a part of a community. Because we have, in our society today, is the least connected society in all of history. We think we're friends with a lot of people. You think you're cool, but you're not. And so what we get to, some of you are cool. I mean, I'm not. I've never have been, never will be. But what's great about being part of our church community is you get to share in life together. That's why Connect Groups is so important. And really being around here, do you know there's people that look forward to you being here? And it's not just me. Yeah, it's a big deal. You are such a partner with people in their faith. So anyway, today we are talking through Mark chapter 5, verse 21 through 43. So you can write that down in your notes, or if you're following along on YouVersion, all that is there. But today we're going to talk about desperate measures. Desperate measures. In every adventure that you go on, whether you are in a season of life where the kids are gone out of the house and you're like, all right, what's next? Or you're in a season of you have a little infant at home and you don't understand how this thing can continue to cry as nonstop as it does. Or you're in a season where you're kind of getting desperate because that guy or that girl that you are going to, the one in your mind has not shown up yet, or the one that you thought was the one showed up and they end up just being a jerk. And so then you're frustrated why you keep getting all these jerks. And now you're just in this desperate, and you start finding yourself saying, at least they have a job. At least they talk to their mom. At least I kind of think they love Jesus. I'm not quite sure, but I'm willing to compromise and go with it. And so what happens when we are faced with these moments of desperation, we usually lower our expectations. Like when I'm hungry and I'm like really craving like good tacos, like you can go to Adoba, you can go to some really authentic, nice, freshly made tortillas. But when the hunger keeps going, you find yourself at Taco Bell. You regret it later, but you know you're not really having the real thing, even though chalupas are pretty amazing. But you find that you lower your expectations, and you find yourself going, you have first start off with this big dream that really it's just, okay, as long as you meet the bare minimum, as long as they kind of meet the bare minimum, and you start compromising your convictions and lowering your expectations. And sometimes that is a place where you once have this conviction, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. But because of whatever desperate time you're in, you just kind of go with it. Because you're seeking a temporary relief. You're seeking something that's just going to numb the pain for now. That's usually how most addictions begin. It's not because, hey, I decided to wake up and it's Wednesday, it's a good day to become a cocaine addict. All right. No, it usually doesn't start that way. It usually starts with, I need some relief, so I'm going to take a pill. I'm going to take another pill. I'm going to drink this. I'm going to do that. And what happens is these temporary relief because of this desire to find some sort of relief in the desperate times turns into a habitual habit that becomes destructive. And so what we do is we just end up grabbing for anything that gives us a false sense of stability because we're desperate. I've done the same thing. I remember, back in, when one of my first experiences with Jesus, when contemplating whether or not to take my own life. Because it was like, is this going to be better than what I'm experiencing now? Can I just get some relief? Even going on, I remember when Aaron and I first got married, we're about 3 weeks into our marriage, and it's supposed to be like bliss, right? It wasn't bliss. It was, I literally remember thinking, what did I do? Did I just make the worst decision of my life 3 weeks ago? Not joking, not exaggerating. And we lived in a small apartment where it was about as big as each of these sections, just one section there. And so I remember when we would get into an argument, I would go, I have to go in the other room, just calm down. I'm in the other room. That's about as big as the place was. And just being so frustrated. And I remember God talking to me in that time because I'm going, Lord, you did this. Your fault. And I remember God saying, goes, love her like you love the church. I'm like, okay, way to be scriptural about it. Okay. He goes, no, turn there. So I turn to Ephesians, and I begin to read, and it talks about, not only does he say love them like you love the church, but said that Jesus gave his life up for her, for the church. He sacrificed himself. So I began contemplating and thinking and reflecting on all that Jesus went through for us. And God is calling me as a husband to do that for my wife. Because she wasn't the problem. I was the problem. There were things that I was holding on to that I didn't want to let go of. And so whenever you begin something like a marriage relationship, whenever you start looking in the mirror, you start to see your flaws. And now I have a commentator. And so it's just realizing, man, God, you've got to transform something in me. And that's what happens whenever we face and we look to Jesus and we realize that Jesus takes any season or moment of our desperation and gives it an opportunity to become a moment of transformation. Because it's only in those times of desperation that you're actually willing to change. It's those times of desperation that you actually want something different than what you have now. Because most of the time, we really like our dysfunction. We've talked about it. We pet it. We name it. We think it's cute. We do whatever we can to protect it. But when we realize when that runs out, our hands are finally free to say, Lord, I need you. But that's where the crossroad you're at. Whenever you're in a crossroad of desperation, you're either going to choose something temporary or you're going to choose something called Jesus. And that's where we kind of jump into this situation. Because we understand that in seasons or moments of desperation, that's where the enemy thrives. He's an opportunist. He loves to just sit and he'll just wait. He'll just wait. He'll just wait. And when the moment is there, that's when he springs. He puts that thought in your head. It's not a big deal. She'll never find out. It's only one time. And suddenly, your moment of desperation has been led to a season of compromise and the destruction that follows that. So as we look at Mark chapter 5, go ahead and turn there in your Bible, YouVersion app, or it's going to be here on the screen. But I want you to see and understand when we look at Mark chapter 5, verse 21 through 43, Jesus has gone back and forth from the east side to the west banks of the Galilee. He's teaching, he's healing, he's trying to get through crowds. We realize this, that Jesus is like, hey, don't tell anyone, I don't want a crowd. Because we realize when there's a crowd, there is problems. And so every place he tries to go, it slows him down. And people start asking for things that Jesus is like, I've never even came for that. And so people start wanting the miracles more than they're wanting Jesus. They're wanting a show more than they're wanting the Savior, more than they're wanting the Messiah. Because when you don't give people what they want and they're not grounded in Christ, what happens is they revolt. It turns into rebellion. Whenever you have religion, it will turn into rebellion. And so that is kind of the atmosphere that Jesus is knowing what's happening. But what I love about these two stories interwoven into one story is that you really get to see Jesus. how he's marked by his compassion and his attention to the details. And this is so important, as the whole point of this series is to understand and grow deeper in our relationship with Jesus, that he is the one that you can depend on in the adventure of life. He's the one that you can grab a hold of. He's the one that will lead you, because he is the way, the truth, and the life. And until we really grasp that, we're gonna struggle. So we're diving into this account. We're going to be introduced to three people. We'll kind of review them at the end. But I want us to go into the story. These two people are reaching out. They're pursuing Jesus out of a season and out of a moment of desperation. Each coming from two completely different backgrounds. We have Jairus, who is a synagogue leader, who is well known in the community, well respected. He is highly favored in the community. We have the woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, who's been ostracized, pushed out, and we just wish she would just go away. So you have these two different things, different people who are carrying two very different parts of baggage into the story. So we'll look at verse 21. It says, when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him. He was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus, by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him, and earnestly saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come, lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live. And he went with him. So imagine this ruler falling at the feet of Jesus. Now, in this time, we've already seen that Jesus is causing some controversy in the synagogues. Not by the people. The people love it. He teaches with authority, and he's not allowing them to fall asleep. They're not bored in synagogue right now, because Jesus teaches with a certain power and conviction that's grabbing hold of hearts. Now, the synagogue rulers, they're being challenged by this. They're being threatened by this, because here they do it every day of the week, and suddenly Jesus shows up, a carpenter's son, and people are following and starting to grab a hold of who God is. And there's some jealousy, there's some frustration, there's some, man, you don't actually believe this stuff. And what do you do when he comes to your temple? So for Jairus to come, fall at the feet of the very person that is the controversial topic of all the synagogues throughout Galilee, he had to shed a part of himself. He had to risk everything to come to the feet of Jesus. Jesus sees the desperation and the faith in his eyes, and he goes with them. Now understand that this whole story happens at the same time. So as Jesus is now walking with Jairus, they have to walk through the giant crowds. And it's like walking through Disneyland during the summertime. It's miserable. You have to hold on to people's hands just to kind of like get through. You create this like little train, and you are touching people and things that you never wanted to touch or be close to. You're just and then you smell things you never wanted to smell. Like, it's not only you have people smell, but then you have like the recycled air in Space Mountain where they put you in that little room. It's disgusting. With all the money Disneyland has, please get air conditioning. Please get air conditioning. Just filtrate the air, do something. Anyway, so the great crowd followed him and thronged about him, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, who had suffered much under many physicians, has spent all that she had, no better, but rather get worse. So this woman comes in. Now, gain this understanding about this woman. Every month, women, as if they were experiencing their cycles, they actually had to leave the town, leave the village, and get away from everyone because they were considered unclean. They were impure. Now, for some of you ladies, it sounds awesome, like a mini vacation every single month. Like, yeah, see you later, kids. I will be back. Get the Matty Patty done, you know. But this time is you get out. Now, you get to come back. But imagine this for 12 straight years. You have been ostracized from your family. Obviously, she could pay for physicians. She was someone that had money, had wealth. And no matter what she did, the physicians just made it worse. It was painful. It was frustrating. It was demoralizing. And not only that, if she ever did come into the village to get supplies or whatever, she would have to shout, much like the leopard we learned about a few weeks ago, would have to shout, unclean, unclean. Her disease became her identity. But this woman is in this crowd. She has not shouted unclean. She has not told anyone about her impurity. She should be declaring it so that people can get away from her so they don't get what she got. But she didn't. The penalty to not declare your uncleanliness was permanent exile or even sometimes death. But here she is, incognito, going through this crowd because she only has one thing on mind, and that is, I have to get to Jesus. So she is risking everything. For she said, if I even touch his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And get this, and Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? I love the disciples because they're morons. And I identify with that because I can be a moron sometimes. They're like, Jesus, remember we're at Disneyland? There's 1,000 people around us. Everyone is touching you. What do you mean, who touched you? Kind of like, come on, Jesus, like, wake up. Everyone's touching you. You see the crowd pressing around you? Yet you say, who touched me? He looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. You see, Jairus fell at the feet of Jesus. This woman is falling at the feet of Jesus. And he said to her, daughter, your faith had made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. What a powerful response from being ostracized by society to now being called daughter of the Son of God. You know that's why Jesus said, hey, can we stop? Like, stop, who touched me? He wasn't upset. He wasn't angry. He wasn't like, okay, I need to write you down and record that I healed you. Because Jesus was more concerned about creating a relationship with this woman, re-identifying her with her name now, daughter, than he ever was about the healing. Because emotional pain can be so painful. That's where the healing needed to happen. Jesus looked at this woman and says, daughter. That's inclusion. Now, if you've gotten lost in the story, he's just healed this woman. Great things are happening. But what are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to go heal the little girl. You ever done that? Like Aaron and I do this when we walk into Target. We're getting dish soap. Suddenly we're in the clothing clearance department looking for a new outfit. Every time. Yeah. And it's like, how did we go from Target over here in this section, in the soft lines, and where we should be in the hard lines? And so why? And I get so frustrated because I have a to-do list. And if it's not on the to-do list, it should not be bothered. Not my problem. So I'm freaking out when I read this story because I'm like, Jesus, Jairus' daughter, forget the woman. One thing at a time. I say that, no, one thing at a time. Just give me one thing at a time and I can handle that. But Jesus is so much better than me. Isn't that awesome? He takes a moment. He spends time with her. But something happens. While he was still speaking, so he's still speaking to this woman. All this commotion is happening. There came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Those are words you never want to hear. Why trouble the teacher any further? In other words, there's no hope. Give up. We're done. He took too long. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. He does this to fulfill the Levitical law that you need 3 witnesses to give account to what's happening, whether a legal thing or healing. They came to the house of the ruler's synagogue. Jesus saw the commotion. People were weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. They laughed at him. But he put them all outside, took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went into where the child was. It's amazing when you're living and trying to walk in faith, there's going to be times you're going to have to ask the people who are going to laugh at you, scoff at you, that they need to go outside. There's a time where you cannot allow that kind of negativity and that kind of pulling down of you in your life. And I love that Jesus has no problem kicking people out of the house. I love it. Like me, 9 o'clock, you're out, go. Aaron says it's rude. I say it's being Christ-like. But Jesus says, no, you need to go. You need to go. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl got up, began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. He strictly charged them that no one should know this, and he told her to give her something to eat. I love Jesus' attention to detail. Not only does he call this woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, but now he calls this 12-year-old little girl. I can't imagine the fear that this girl experienced when she was coming back to life. Especially if she got a scene of heaven. She's like, why am I going back there? To be able to look at her and go, little girl. Do you hear the compassion and the heart in Jesus' voice and his, just who he is? Little girl. Then the other thing I love what Jesus does, he's a realist. Get this girl some food. She's going to be cranky. Because we don't need any hangry going on here. Come on now. Even after a miracle, you got to eat. And so I love, again, just this attention to detail. So we see these three main characters in the story. Jesus, who was moved out of compassion and not crisis. He wasn't concerned about being interrupted to be able to do a miracle. We see the temple ruler, Jairus. His love for his daughter outweighed his love for his reputation. It'd be amazing to see you go, oh, you went to Jesus? Oh. So are you a Jesus follower now? So you can begin to see the tension that he now has to experience around his peers. Then you have the woman who, out of faith and out of honor for Jesus, she wanted just a little bit of Jesus and knew that even just a little bit of Jesus was enough for what she needed. She just needed his healing, and Jesus wanted a relationship with her. So the question I have for you before we get to our points of application is, how do you respond in seasons of desperation? Do you think of do you go through and go, well, if I do this, I know that I'm going to have to answer this? Are you thinking through all the different ways that you should or shouldn't do certain things? Like Jairus, are you so concerned about your reputation that you're afraid to say, I need Jesus' help with this? Are you willing to risk even to be punished more in order to get to Jesus? Are you willing to push through the crowd to just grab a hold of his cloak? Are you willing to just do anything possible to get to him? Well, as you kind of contemplate what you do, because I believe God wants to bring a transformation there. He wants to transform the way that you face these seasons, because he wants you to experience life. And so many times when we are in desperate times, we look for the wrong thing. We grab a hold of the things that cause more destruction. So number one, I want you to write this down. Number one is shed your pride and your guilt. If you're going to seek Jesus in moments of desperation, we have to shed our pride and our guilt. And Aaron, if you can bring up those things. See, Jairus risked his reputation. The woman risked being thrown out. But each of us, majority of the time we deal, as we look at Jairus, he dealt with something called pride. Go ahead, one more. He dealt with something with pride. Can you imagine what the woman dealt with guilt? If I'm wrong, thank you, Aaron. Yeah, that one's leaking. That's okay. That's fine. That's fine. Awesome. We're dealing with guilt. What if Jesus doesn't heal me? I may have now just infected this entire crowd. Why what if Jesus says, get out of here? You're unclean. Oh man, what if I make a dumb decision? And you just start going through guilt and guilt and guilt. And you start guilting yourself. But with pride, you know what pride does? Pride it convinces you that you can do everything on your own. And that becomes very lonely very fast. And what happens with pride is that we start to think that we can literally do it all on our own. I know this is going to leak. That's okay. And so what we end up doing is we start carrying around shame and we start carrying around guilt all around us. And at first we're like, oh, we can handle this. Look how tough I am. Yeah. I can do curls. I'm strong. But what happens is there's a moment where you're supposed to put the weights down. But when you carry around shame, guilt, pride, you can't do that because it becomes a part of you. And as you walk through life, you realize, man, it's getting heavy. It's getting heavy. And there's a season that maybe you come to know Christ. And Aaron, if you can bring Jesus up here. This is better than Elf on the Shelf. There you go. That's Jesus. Elf on the Shelf is so judgmental, so rude. Jesus going, I see what you do, but I love you anyway. What happens here is you're so busy carrying your shame and guilt, and so many of this, what we do is we bring our baggage with us. We want Jesus, but we want our baggage too. You know what I mean? And so we go, okay, yeah, Jesus, I want to be your friend. I want to be in a relationship with you. And so you take Jesus' hand. But you're still carrying the guilt and shame. And so what happens, because you never let go of this, you start thinking that he's the one guilting you. I can't go to church. It makes me feel too guilty. That's not Jesus. That's the guilt you're carrying. Well, I've got Jesus in my life. I'm fantastic. I'm wonderful. I'm righteous. I do nothing wrong. It's all those other sinners out there. That's not Jesus. That's just you being prideful. Amen. You will not experience the power and the freedom and the relationship that is with Jesus until you let this go. You awake now? And you actually grab a hold of who Jesus is. Because you realize that Jesus never came to bring you guilt. Jesus never came to bring you pride. And so when you begin to shed that shame and that kind of guilt, what begins to happen is you experience something called freedom. You begin to experience something called hope. You start to experience something called faith. And so you look at Jairus and you look at the woman who was bleeding. Jairus had to let go of pride. The woman had to let go of guilt in order to get to Jesus. And it's only then that you're going to be able to experience who he is. And what happens next is, number 2, write this down. You have to raise your expectations. The greater and the more that you know Jesus, the more that you read about him, the more you pray, the more you press in and lean into worship, your expectations of who he is should increase. As you learn that he is able to do all things, in him in Colossians it says that all things are held together by him. When you begin to grasp and understand, not only in your head but in your heart, all that he is, you begin to have unimaginable, unreasonable expectations of Jesus. And what that does, it raises your faith and it raises your hope. And as you do that, we learned about this a few months ago when we talked about faith, hope, and love. When faith and hope increase, our love increases for God and for other people. And so as we realize this, we understand that our expectation of who God is going to be displayed first in your prayer and your praise life. Do you seek after him? Are you content with before dinner prayers? Lord God, thank you for this food. Thank you for how greasy it is and delicious. I pray it has no calories and it doesn't clog my arteries. Amen. Okay. But when the arteries do get clogged, you actually start to pray. You actually start to do business with the Lord. What if we don't wait to that point of desperation and we begin to lean in and begin to seek after Jesus and begin praying, begin praising him for all the situations we're going through in our life? Because when desperate times come, your character will be revealed. You will see whether or not you're leaning in on Jesus or you're leaning in on something else. And what I love about this story is when you look at the story of Jairus, he's already in a desperate moment. Did he come to Jesus ahead of time? Did he give Jesus like a good, 3-day leeway time to get over to his daughter? No. He literally gave Jesus minutes. That is how long it took him to drop his pride and come to Jesus. But what's powerful about that, when he gets news of his daughter, can you imagine the Jairus' desperation level went from here to here in like 0.01 second? Now it's just heals like, I've lost my daughter. And I love what Jesus does because he stops, he looks at him and says, do not be afraid, believe. Believe. Do not be afraid, believe. I'm going to invite the worship team up. This is my encouragement to you as we go into a time of worship together. I want you to take a moment to take inventory. Are you at a place where it's time to shed your pride? Are you at a place that you need to shed your guilt? You may not feel good enough to come to Jesus. Can I tell you, that is a lie from the enemy. Drop it. Jesus just wants you. He wants you. Maybe you're at a place where you need to raise your expectations and go, man, I'm not just going to pray to God and say thank you for my food, but I'm going to raise my expectations the way I pray for my kids, the way that I pray for my parents, the way that I pray for my employees, the way that I pray for the people around me in my circle of influence. I'm actually going to contend for them instead of put up for them. And so I want to encourage us to all rise together. I want us to stand. You have an opportunity here. As we go into worship, we're singing just one of my favorite songs. It's a mix between a new song and an older song. What I want us to do is wherever you're at, I want you to respond. And maybe that's lifting your hand during worship. Maybe it's coming to the front. You're welcome to do that. But I want you to make a tangible, physical move. Something. Because majority of the time, what keeps our hands in our pockets, what keeps our faith to ourselves is that we're prideful. Or we don't think that we're good enough. And you've got to shed that if you want to see God move. You have to shed it. You have to get rid of it. Because you will not experience the freedom that God intended for you until you say, Lord, I'm yours. So let's worship together.